I'd love to hear from each of you in terms of how you felt that your specific area that you operate in was impacted by the pandemic. Maybe we'll start with Jael. I know that as artistic director of Fold, you had to try to figure out how to retool an entire festival as a result of the shutdowns and the emergency orders. Maybe share a little bit about what that experience was like for you.
Yeah, so the Festival of Literary Diversity, or FOLD, is Canada's first festival for diverse authors and storytellers. So there's literary festivals that take place across the country where authors come and present, they talk, they do interviews, and their books are sold, and they happen all across the country. But our FOLD, which takes place in Brampton every May, the first weekend in May, is the first and only festival centered around marginalized authors and underrepresented storytellers. So we have this fabulous lineup of authors. We had them all confirmed by January. We started doing rollout announcements February, March. And then the conversation about, a possible pandemic started to come about. And we were in that weird zone where initially it was just like, oh, March break, it's just going to be a little bit longer than usual. And we were, a month after that. So there was sort of this feeling like things might be fine by May. But I felt like even if things were fine, that there was going to be a shift and a change. And it was better for us to just get a move on rather than wait for a no or a maybe or halfway. So around March break, we started behind the scenes actually planning for a virtual festival. And most of my colleagues who had festivals around that time canceled. Most of the festivals, there's about, I would say about a handful that take place in spring. Most of the festivals are in fall. And almost all of them except one in New Brunswick canceled the festival. The one in New Brunswick went with pre-recorded events. So they sort of recorded a bunch and then released them. So we were the only festival that went live with a virtual event May, I don't even remember the dates now. It's gone blank in my mind. Sarah, May 2nd to 6th or something like that, 2nd to 5th. And so we moved all of our events into a virtual space. We changed the whole schedule in order to accommodate that. Normally, in an in-person event, you would have maybe more events at the same time, etc. So we took all of our authors having 2 events. They only got 1, generally speaking. They were spread out further, so we actually took up more days to do the festival. We did what we called preview events, and then we only had about anywhere between 4 or 6 events a day. So that's how we sort of had it. And it impacted us because, people weren't coming physically, and that was a negative. But on the positive, it allowed us to advertise and reach across the country for the first time. So there was lots of people across Canada who saw the Fold for the very first time, having been following us on Twitter or Instagram or any social media for years because of the content is relevant to them, but they were never able to come. So while it was a negative and while it is having a negative impact in a lot of ways on our sector, it was also a really positive experience for us. We had 7,000 attendees over the course of the weekend, which normally we have about 1,000. So it was a big jump for us in terms of numbers. We had huge attendance from BC to all the way to Newfoundland and in Nunavut and everywhere. So we also had international participation from Guyana and India, and a huge turnout from New York spaces, from the States as well. So it was a strange year, I will say. But we are moving towards including virtual elements in our festival going forward because of it.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think, it was really interesting to see how you were able to just innovate as a result of this and sort of now maybe some long-term changes that you're hoping to put in place. So that was very exciting. And yeah, the Fold is such a sort of iconic event in Brampton now, where people really look forward to it. And I know that has been something that's been a challenge for you in the past, Jill, is trying to figure out how to get folks from, around Ontario and the world world to come into Brampton and really bolster our local economy through the festival and using these types of events. But it's just been so interesting to see how you've been able to retool it. So glad that there was a silver lining out of the pandemic for Fold. Regan, maybe I can throw the question over to you as someone that sort of it's helping to manage our local arts gallery, art gallery. How were you and some of the artists impacted by COVID-19?
Well, interestingly enough, Beaux Arts Brampton, as you know, Sarah, is a not-for-profit artist-run gallery that's been in Brampton for quite some time, about 18, 19 years now. We've gone through a massive change in operation in the last 4 years, and we had worked very diligently to change the platform to suit the modern Brampton and Brampton of today and Peel region. And it was March 4th, I believe, March 4th to 9th, that we had just gotten word after submitting a very large grant to the Ontario Arts Council, whereby we had to outline all of our efforts from an operations standpoint and a programming standpoint, that we were invited to apply for core funding for our artist-run gallery, similar to that which they have in the city of Hamilton and as well as in Etobicoke Centre. So our collective was extraordinarily happy. It was all programming, of course, based on live engagement, which is so core to our art sector. Then COVID hit, and everything was in question. So a lot of the collective, there was a lot of nervousness, a lot of contracting after all that expansion, right, or hope of expansion that we were looking so forward to and had worked so hard for in the last 3-4 years. But I can happily say since then, I think this the members of Beaux Arts and the visual artists sector that is very involved here, they did an incredible job of coming together and really making the pivot happen. It's not the same. It's not the same as live engagement, and it's still uncertain what it looks like for us from a visual art perspective, right? We're so, we're fortunate that we can do virtual exhibitions and things like that we're exploring now. But it's a bit too soon to say how it will unfold. But we're looking at pivoting all that program going forward. And with all the membership engagement and the collaboration that's come out of this COVID pandemic experience, it's safe to say that there's a lot of hope going forward that the pivot will take root, and that we'll be able to rise to the occasion of these new challenges, right, that we're facing. So it's similar to, I think, many of us where, we're in crisis management, and now we're just taking one step out of that and saying we might pull through, particularly with various levels of support from different levels of government, and as well as a lot of the foundations that are coming forward to discuss and have this discussion, much like yourself, Sarah, facilitating this type of talk that we can learn and share from each other and encourage, right, that we're going to make it forward, because the arts is notably what, after I think the hospitality sector, the most hardest hit. So
absolutely. That's exactly, I'm so grateful that Bill is also able to join us today to hear some of those concerns from a local level, because I think, while some parts of the province, they may have multiple art galleries that are operating, in Brampton, we really only have very limited spaces where artists can show their work and have that, engagement with the community. And so I think it's important, for Jill to also hear from a local perspective how our local gallery was impacted. So thank you for sharing that. Does anyone else want to jump in terms of how, the creative sector that you work in has been impacted by COVID-19? Yeah, Sharda.
Yeah. I definitely can speak more from being an independent artist. I do not, my work is largely in theater and community engaged arts, and I think the effect has been rather devastating in these sectors. I mean, I remember when the pandemic broke. Oh my God, I'm saying when I remember as if it was only in March, but it seems like ages now.
It's like ages ago.
So when the pandemic broke, I was facilitating a music and sound workshop for this collective called the Laboratory for Artistic Intelligence that had conceived a rather unique arts project for newcomer professionals. And the entire workshop was to culminate in an arts installation at the Luminato Festival in June. I remember we all had a, we all had a rather profound lightness to us when we got together on March 13th. Walking into the Meridian Arts Center, I was so happy to see everyone, and we had a wonderful, wonderful session. But deep down, I think we all knew that this was it. That we wouldn't be together again for a very long time. And even before the session ended, we were told that the center would be closed and we wouldn't be able to continue working there. And this was in March, and we had still, to get into production for an installation in June at the for the Luminato Festival. We had just started work, and there was a lot of enthusiasm and all of that. More than 3 months in, we thought, okay, it would still happen because I think theater and, large scale festivals like Luminato still hadn't made the decision. They thought, it's only in June and things would probably, sort itself out. But then more than 3 months, and I want to say that the effects have been extremely devastating. Theaters are closed. All the shows, I had two shows that were two new plays that were to be premiered. I don't know if it is ever going to see the light of the day. And I think that is the case for so many of us who are in theater, where live theater, where you need to be there. You need to be there in the presence of an audience, because we're also, as performers, we're also constantly feeding off, the audience's energy, a live audience's energy. And when that is missing, it becomes extremely difficult. Livelihoods are lost. And, my heart actually goes out to those actors who are just starting off their careers. They've had to put their careers on hold, and there's so much of uncertainty, and that's what nobody knows what's going to happen, and that's where we are at.
No, and I think, thank you for sharing that, Sharda. I think that's, a sentiment. And Jill, feel free to jump in. I know you've been connecting with artists and folks from across the creative sectors, throughout the province, and the unpredictability and the precariousness of the future really is a major concern. I'd love to hear from you, Jill, what you're hearing on the ground as well.
Absolutely. I'm just being very mindful of not wanting to take up a lot of space in this meeting, because I think it's so important that Bramptonians hear, about the impact that COVID has had on the arts sector from yourselves. But certainly, across the sector, I have heard, as Sanjana said so eloquently, that theater, our live entertainment industry, our live entertainment workers are those who have been so hardly hit. Because quite frankly, as you said, there is an element of enjoying arts and culture in person that cannot be replicated online. And what our government, our Ford government needs to understand is regardless of whether or not artists have so generously shared their work, I cannot count the number of musicians, visual artists, poets, literary artists, fashion designers, donating PPE, doing shows, concerts online. All of this was certainly a good accommodation during COVID-19. It was certainly a way to bring us together, because let's not forget about culture, arts, and the mental health connection here. And I'm sure, Christina, in your education hat, you know exactly what I'm speaking about from a pedagogical standpoint, and just from a way of bringing social cohesion to our communities through the mental health and wellness and inspiration that arts provides. This wasn't paying artists. This isn't paying artists. So what we said very, very, very early on in the COVID-19 pandemic was we needed a provincial plan for our arts sector, for our cultural workers. We needed direct funding for many folks who weren't included in the federal program of CERB when it first rolled out. And that was not heard by our Ford government. So what we have now, being in stage 3 in Toronto of the reopening, is we still have folks who are unclear about what the guidelines are, what the emergency measures are. When will we be able to have live performance? When will we be able to have income back in the pockets of cultural workers, artists, arts organizations? So this is a real concern. And what we've been advocating for, I mean, for goodness sakes, I had written a letter, Save Arts and Culture, which was addressed to Minister MacLeod, Premier Ford, and signed by a significant number, hundreds, maybe it's thousands at this point, I haven't checked the numbers recently, of folks who kept saying, what is the plan? What is the plan? And what the government has to understand is we cannot only consider the revitalization of the big 8 institutions. We have to look at the small and medium-sized organizations and collectives and individual artists in our community, especially equity seeking collectives and organizations. I'm thinking of like Jael, for instance, and Fold. These are crucial, not only from an arts and culture perspective, but if we are to be a province that's actually doing the work of anti-Black racism, of addressing anti-Black racism and addressing anti-Indigenous racism, we have to look at how arts and culture is a vehicle to that. And without a plan, without a provincial strategy for addressing our arts, without a stabilization fund for our ethnic media and our ethnic producers who bring the language of the arts and who also bring very critical COVID-19 updates to multilingual households during a pandemic, if we don't have those pieces in place, we're in trouble. So, during this time, what I'd like to say, we have been advocating long before COVID-19 for the reinstatement of the Indigenous Culture Fund. We have been advocating long before COVID-19 for the reinstatement and, frankly, doubling up of funding to the Ontario Arts Council, which we know is the bread and butter for many of our arts organizations, individuals, and collectives. We've certainly been advocating for more funding in our music industries, as we saw the Ontario Music Fund slashed by 50%. We also know that our museums, for instance, have been operating, with a CMOG fund that's frankly antiquated, is what I've heard from many stakeholders, and needed an injection of investment for years. This program has stood the test of time for many years with the same funding grossly below inflation. And the same can be said for our libraries as well, that haven't had, additional provincial funding in 20-odd years. This is just not the way that we say thank you to arts creators, especially people who during this pandemic have been central to keeping us all mentally sound as best they can, to creating and donating PPE, to supporting, parents at home who are now doing the triple duty of not only being at home working digitally, but being an educator, being a social worker, mitigating child battles in the home. It's been poets, it's been the literary artists who have shared their books online, who give those parents and guardians an hour, a break to be able to replenish, to get back to the table of juggling 10 jobs now at home because of COVID. So I say all of that to say this, that we know that culture, we know that our sector contributes some $28 billion. $28 billion, to our economy on an annual basis. So I strongly believe that not only is the government helping the arts is not, it's not bootstrap ideology, it's not a handout, it is the government helping to boost our economy. It is the government helping to boost our tourism, to boost our hospitality industry. This is what the arts and culture is all about. And if we don't have a thriving arts and culture sector here in Ontario, then we lose plenty in the name of job creation. That's going to have a direct impact even as well to our education sector, where we know thousands of kids stay in school, they thrive in school, they finally give school the time of day because of arts education, which then translates into post-secondary education and then careers to add to that ballooning multi-billion-dollar investment that our economy gets through our sector. So we have to keep the work going. We have to keep the work going, and we have to do so with an with an equity lens. We have to do that with an anti-oppression lens, and we have to do that with an approach that sees the arts as an investment. It is an investment, and this is a time to show up, not to disappear. And we need direct funding from our government.